On Father's Day, my son looked across the lunch table and said, "I wish you had never been my dad." I picked up the brass Mercedes key beside his plate. "Then live as if you never had one," I said. 20 minutes after I drove away, he texted me, "Bring my car back or I'm calling the cops." The Mercedes was not his. It belonged to Mercer Motor Restoration, the shop I had founded 41 years earlier. Luke had been allowed to drive it as the sales manager. Permission was not ownership. No matter how many neighbors had watched him wash it in his driveway, the brass tag on the key was older than the car. Luke had stamped the word "Dad" into it in shop class when he was 12. The letters leaned downhill because he had hit each one harder than the last. For 23 years, I had carried that tag on every company master key. Now it felt cold in my hand. Luke's message was followed by another. "I'm serious. Paige has the title. You stole it in front of witnesses." That sentence told me the Father's Day insult had not started at the lunch table. Luke had invited me to lunch with a message saying he wanted one normal Father's Day. When I arrived, the Mercedes stood in his driveway with a red bow Paige had tied around the hood for photographs. She asked me to stand beside Luke while Emma took a picture. I declined. The title alert was already in my attorney's hands, and I would not pose as if I had presented the car to him. Luke asked why I was ruining the day. I told him the Mercedes had to return to the shop while a title question was reviewed. He said the car was the only proof I had ever been proud of him. When I told him company property could not prove love, his face changed. That was when he said he wished I had never been his father. At the time, I thought pain had made him reckless. The text about Paige having the title made the cruelty look rehearsed. 3 days earlier, a vehicle title monitoring service had alerted the shop that someone had requested a transfer record for the Mercedes. The request included a document called a vehicle ownership release and a signature that looked enough like mine to frighten a clerk. I had not signed it. I had called the title office, placed a fraud flag on the company vehicle, moved the original fleet records into my attorney's custody, and hired a licensed investigator before Luke ever invited me to lunch. She had made the rules plain. She could preserve a professional vehicle transaction and work with a willing lender or business witness. She could not enter Luke's home, record our family meal, monitor a bedroom or bathroom, manufacture a conversation, or make my son say anything he did not choose to say. "I need to know whether this is carelessness or a plan," I told her. "Then protect the asset first," she said. "Let the plan reveal itself second." That was why I took the Mercedes when Luke told me he wished I had never been his father. The company's attorney had already told me to return the flagged vehicle to the secured shop lot. I did not take it to punish him. I took it because an ownership request carrying my false signature had turned a family benefit into evidence. I sent Luke one answer: the Mercedes is titled to the company. Your permission to use it is revoked. Direct questions to the shop attorney. His reply arrived before I reached the next light. Too late. I called them. When I reached Mercer Motor Restoration, 2 patrol cars were waiting outside the gate. The shop occupied an old brick bus depot at the edge of town. We restored classic cars in the rear bays, repaired late-model luxury vehicles in the center, and kept a small sales office by the street. 27 people earned their living there. Their names mattered more to me than the chrome sign over the door. The patrol officer asked me to step away from the Mercedes. I did. He asked for my license and proof that I had authority to possess the car. I handed him the current registration, a copy of the company fleet schedule, and the letter showing that Luke's permission had been revoked before his theft report was completed. The second officer spoke to Luke by phone. After several minutes, the first officer showed me a photograph Luke had submitted with his report. It was the supposed vehicle ownership release. My name appeared at the bottom. The document claimed Mercer Motor Restoration had transferred the Mercedes to Luke as an employment bonus 6 months earlier. "Did you sign this?" the officer asked. "No." "Did you give your son the vehicle?" I gave him permission to use it while he remained sales manager. The company paid the registration, maintenance, and insurance. The officer looked through the shop window. Where the fleet board listed the Mercedes under company inventory, he did not arrest me. He did not arrest Luke either. The current state record still names the company, he said. The report and the release conflict. We are documenting both. An auto theft investigator will review the ownership claim and whether anyone knowingly filed false information. That was the first incomplete victory. I still had the car, but Luke had created a police record saying I was a thief. The forged release had moved beyond a family threat. It now sat inside an official file. The patrol officer gave me a report number and warned me not to contact Luke about changing his statement. If I pressured him, even as a father, it could muddy the investigation. I agreed. Before leaving, the officer photographed the vehicle identification plate and the company registration. He did not certify either document as final proof. He simply preserved what existed when he arrived. That restraint helped me more than instant agreement would have. Luke could no longer claim the police had ignored him because I owned the shop. His allegation had been taken seriously. So had my records. As the patrol cars pulled away, 3 mechanics stood silently inside the bay. I could feel the question none of them wanted to ask. If the owner and his son were fighting over a car, what happened to everyone's paycheck when the fight reached the company? I locked the Mercedes in the secured service bay and placed the brass dad key in the shop safe. My daughter, Emma, arrived 10 minutes later. She was the shop bookkeeper and Luke's younger sister. She had been at the Father's Day lunch, sitting beside Paige, when Luke said the words that ended it. She looked pale and angry with both of us. "Did you really take his car?" she asked. "I returned a company vehicle to company property. He says you gave it to him when he became sales manager." "Did you process a transfer?" She shook her head. "Did the company pay the registration last month?" Her expression changed. "Yes." "Then do not choose between your brother and me yet," I said. "Pull every payment tied to that Mercedes. Preserve it. Change nothing." Emma looked through the window at the locked service bay. Why would he call the police if he knew the company owned it? That is the question I intend to answer. The lender called Monday morning. A $94,000 title-secured loan had been requested against the Mercedes. Luke was listed as the owner and borrower. The forged company release was the document connecting him to the car. Paige had signed as a witness to the transfer. The lender had not released money. The title flag and police conflict had stopped the application at final review. "Can you tell me who prepared the release?" I asked the fraud officer. "Not from the document alone," she said. "Your son may claim he received it and believed it was valid. Your daughter-in-law may say she witnessed a signature she thought was yours. We can freeze the application, but knowledge and intent require evidence." The investigator had said almost the same thing. A false page could protect everyone who touched it if each person blamed a hand outside the room. The fraud officer also told me the loan proceeds were scheduled for a private account, not a Mercer Motor Restoration account. That fact did not prove who forged the release, but it destroyed Luke's claim that the loan was ordinary company financing. $94,000 was almost exactly what Luke and Paige owed after renovating a house beyond their income. I knew the amount because Luke had asked me for help 6 months earlier. I offered to pay for a financial counselor and help them sell without losing everything. He called that an insult. "You would rescue an employee before your own son," he had said. "I would help either one stop the bleeding," I told him. "I will not pretend debt disappears because family signs a check." Now the Mercedes had become the check he believed I should have written. I spent Monday morning with Emma reviewing the ordinary records. The Mercedes had been purchased by Mercer Motor Restoration 3 years earlier as a client demonstration car. Luke signed a vehicle use agreement. It called the Mercedes company property 7 times. The shop paid every service bill. The business name appeared on every registration renewal. There had been no bonus approval, no sale invoice, and no tax entry showing a transfer. The brass key tag was not proof of ownership. It was proof that I had once trusted my son enough to let memory and business hang from the same ring. Luke had grown up in the shop. At 6, he sorted washers into coffee cans. At 14, he learned to polish paint without burning through the clear coat. At 22, he sold his first restored roadster and called me from the customer's driveway because he could not stop laughing. I made him sales manager at 34. That promotion came with the Mercedes because some clients expected the person selling six-figure restorations to arrive in something better than an old pickup. I told Luke the car was a tool. He heard a promise. Over time, he began parking it at the front of family photographs. He called it my S-Class in front of customers. Paige posted pictures from weekend trips with captions about finally living the life they deserved. I corrected him twice in private. I never corrected him in public. My silence had allowed a company benefit to harden into family folklore. Emma remembered it differently. She told me Luke had called the Mercedes his bonus from the first week, and Paige had corrected anyone who called it a company car. Emma assumed I had made a private promise. "Why did you never say something in front of us?" she asked. "Because I thought correcting him would make him look small. And now a lender and the police have to decide whether his story was true." She closed the maintenance file. "You protected his pride until it became evidence against you." The sentence stung because it was accurate. A father can help build entitlement by treating every correction as cruelty. My failure did not create Luke's false signature, but it had made the lie easier for other people to believe. It had not transferred a title. By Monday afternoon, Luke had emailed the shop staff. He said I had suffered an emotional episode at lunch, stolen his personal car, and suspended him without cause. He instructed sales employees to send all calls to his private number until ownership stabilized. That threatened more than my pride. If customers followed him, deposits could leave the shop. If the lender treated the Mercedes fraud as company behavior, our credit line could freeze before payroll. I called a staff meeting. I did not play family texts or describe Luke's insult. I showed the current company registration and told everyone the vehicle was under a fraud review. I said Luke had no authority to collect deposits, promise sales, or speak for the shop until the review ended. Every employee would be paid. Every customer contract would be honored. Then I gave the original fleet ledger to Emma and asked her to lock it in the records room. That was my second protective act. The Mercedes mattered. The 27 people behind it mattered more. One of our oldest painters waited after the meeting. He had worked beside me for 29 years and had watched Luke grow from the boy sorting washers into the manager carrying a tablet through the sales bay. "Do we need to start looking for work?" he asked. "No, are you sure?" I opened the payroll account on Emma's screen and showed him that the next 2 cycles were already funded. I did not show him family evidence. He needed security, not gossip. "If the company credit line changes, you will hear it from me before a rumor," I said. He nodded, then looked toward Luke's empty office. "I am sorry it is him. I was too." But sorrow could not be allowed to sit in the chair where a business decision belonged. Luke came to the shop after closing with Paige beside him. He stood outside the gate and called me. "You humiliated me in front of my staff," he said. "They are company employees. I built the sales department. Then you know where its records are. Open the gate. Not tonight." Paige took the phone. "Daniel, this is getting cruel. Luke said something awful because you told him he would never own the shop. He apologized to Emma. He has not apologized to me. Would you believe him if he did?" I looked at the dark Mercedes behind the glass service door. An apology cannot correct a police report or a signature. Paige lowered her voice. "The lender wants one clean meeting. If you confirm the car was intended for Luke, the complaint disappears and everyone goes back to work." There it was, not a request for reconciliation, a request to make the false page true after it had been used. I told her I would attend a lender meeting at the shop Tuesday morning. Luke and Paige needed to bring every version of the ownership release and loan packet. Emma would attend as the company bookkeeper. Then I called the investigator. They want a professional transaction meeting, I said. Can it be lawfully preserved? She confirmed the shop's transaction office was an authorized business space used for vehicle sales and financing. Under the fictional local rules and our ordinary written business notice, the meeting could be recorded and preserved. The limits remained the same. No recording at Luke's house, no recording of family life, no bait built from a false promise. No claim that I would sign anything I had not agreed to sign. The lender's fraud officer agreed to attend by secured conference connection. Her role was narrow. She could ask about the application, preserve lender records, deny or hold the loan, and refer suspected fraud. She could not decide criminal guilt or family ownership by herself. I chose the risk. I told Luke I was willing to hear his explanation and review a legitimate purchase if the false paperwork was withdrawn. That was true. If he had believed the Mercedes was a gift and admitted the error, there was still a path that did not end with police. He heard only the word purchase. I knew you would come around, he said. Emma asked me that evening whether offering a legitimate purchase gave Luke another chance to manipulate the meeting. Yes, I said. Then why offer it? Because the question is whether he wants the car or whether he is already committed to the false loan. A man who wants the car can withdraw bad papers and negotiate. A man who wants the lie needs me to bless what he already submitted. The investigator reviewed the same distinction. We would not tell Luke a loan had been approved, promise a signature, or claim the police report would vanish. I would place a lawful option beside the fraudulent one. His choice between them would belong to him. That night, I slept badly. I kept hearing the word Dad struck into brass, one crooked letter at a time. There is no clean way to test your own child's honesty. There is only a point where refusing to test it becomes another kind of harm. Tuesday morning. Luke wore the navy suit he used for high-value clients. Paige carried a black portfolio. Emma sat beside me with the fleet ledger closed in front of her. The investigator introduced herself as the professional preserving the disputed transaction. The lender fraud officer appeared on the conference screen and explained that the loan remained frozen while authority and ownership were reviewed. Luke slid the vehicle ownership release across the table. Dad gave me the car 6 months ago, he said. The company kept paying expenses because it was simpler. Where did I sign this? I asked. In your office. Who was present? Paige. No. I looked at Paige. You watched me sign. She met my eyes. Yes, the lie arrived without hesitation. Emma opened the fleet ledger. The date on the release fell on a Thursday when I had been at a restoration auction 200 miles away. The travel receipt and vehicle intake report placed me there from morning until evening. Luke barely glanced at them. Dates get entered wrong, he said. The lender fraud officer asked about the $94,000 loan. Luke said he planned to use it to expand the shop's sales division. There was no company approval, no budget, and no account designated for the money. Where would the funds go? Emma asked. Paige answered. Into an account for the new division. Whose account? Paige looked at Luke. He said, Mine, temporarily. The word temporarily had done a great deal of work in dishonest families. I told them I would retrieve the original vehicle use agreement from the records room. Emma came with me because she controlled the ledger. The fraud officer muted her conference connection to review the application with her team. The investigator remained responsible for preserving the authorized business meeting. Luke and Paige believed the room had emptied around them. From the records office, I could not hear their first words. The investigator's professional system preserved them as part of the transaction. When their voices became clear on the monitor, Luke was speaking. Dad taking the Mercedes was the point, he said. Paige copied his signature onto the vehicle ownership release. I used it for the $94,000 title loan, and the stolen car report makes him look like the thief before he can prove it was company property. Paige said, "The lender already froze it." Luke answered, "Only because he got the alert. Once he admits the car was meant for me, we reopen the loan, clear the house debt, and use the police report to push him out of the shop. He cannot run a company if customers think he steals cars from his own son." Emma's hand covered her mouth. On the recording, Paige said something too low for the office monitor. The investigator lifted one finger, indicating the original stream still carried it, even though we could not understand it from where we stood. Luke replied, "Then delete the draft after the loan funds." The room went quiet. I looked at Emma. "Did you know?" I asked. She shook her head, tears running down her face. "He told me you took back a gift because he stood up to you. That is why I asked you not to choose before the records did." The investigator preserved the complete business recording. She played the clear portion once to confirm the voices and the statement. When the lower section from Paige approached, the fraud officer asked that the original remain sealed until the auto theft detective could attend a formal playback. I knew what Luke had admitted. I did not yet know the exact words Paige had spoken before he mentioned deleting a draft. That uncertainty mattered. Paige had signed as a witness, but the recording might show whether she had been following Luke or building the plan with him. The investigator asked whether I wanted the complete lower passage processed immediately for my private review. I said no. The original was clear enough for the lender's system, and the detective had requested that the first full playback occur with every speaker represented. Part of me wanted to hear Paige's words alone. Another part knew I would spend the night deciding what they meant before she could answer them. The evidence had already shown me Luke's intent. Waiting one day for the complete, witnessed version would not endanger the Mercedes or the employees because the loan and title were frozen, so I let the unanswered portion remain sealed. That choice did not make me passive. I signed the lender referral, gave the detective the genuine title, and removed Luke's access to customer and fleet systems. I closed every escape route that did not depend on guessing what Paige had said. I returned to the transaction room carrying the original vehicle use agreement. Luke smiled. "Ready to be reasonable?" he asked. I set the agreement beside the false release. "The lender has enough to continue its fraud review," I said. "The Mercedes stays secured. No loan funds will move today." His smile disappeared. "You said we could discuss a purchase." We did. "You chose to discuss a false transfer." Paige grabbed the black portfolio. "We are leaving." The investigator did not block them. The lender officer told them the application and submitted documents were preserved business records. They could leave the room, but they could not withdraw the record by taking their copies home. Luke turned to Emma. "Come with us. Dad has been setting me up since Thursday." Emma closed the fleet ledger. "You told the police the car was yours," she said. "I need to hear why." "Because it is mine." "Then the truth will survive the recording." He stared at her as if betrayal belonged only to people who stopped obeying him. After they left, Luke sent me a final message. "If you play games with the police, I will tell every customer you are losing your mind." I added it to the preserved file. By Wednesday morning, Luke had posted a photograph of the Mercedes on social media with the words, "When your own father steals the life you earned." Several customers called the shop. One asked whether police had seized the business. Another wanted his deposit returned. I authorized the refund for anyone who no longer trusted us. Only one customer took it. The others accepted Emma's simple answer that the company vehicle remained secured and all contracts remained valid. I did not answer Luke online. I did not post the registration or the insulting text. A family spectacle might have earned sympathy, but it would also have told Luke which facts the detective still needed to test. Emma removed her brother's administrator access from the company pages. Her hand shook when she pressed the final button. "This feels like choosing you," she said. "It is choosing the company record," I told her. "You can love him after the password changes." The auto theft detective scheduled the formal review for Wednesday afternoon at the shop. The lender fraud officer attended in person. The investigator brought the original recording and preservation statement. Emma attended as company bookkeeper and as the family member Luke had tried to recruit. Luke and Paige came with an attorney who stated that their attendance did not waive any rights. The detective agreed. No one was trapped in the room. They could decline questions. They could leave unless lawful grounds later changed that. The brass dad key tag sat inside a clear evidence sleeve beside the genuine title. Luke looked at it first. "You are really doing this over a car?" he asked. "This meeting is about a forged release, a $94,000 loan, and a false police report," I said. "The car is only where you put them." The detective began with the documents. The state title still named Mercer Motor Restoration. The company fleet ledger and tax records matched it. Luke's vehicle use agreement called his access revocable. The supposed release carried my denied signature and a date when business records placed me out of town. The detective did not announce a conclusion. "Mr. Mercer," he asked Luke, "did you knowingly report a company-owned vehicle as your personal stolen property?" Luke looked at his attorney and said he would answer after hearing the evidence against him. That was his right. I pressed play. The room heard Luke tell the lender that I had given him the Mercedes. It heard Paige say she watched me sign the release. Then it heard Emma open the fleet ledger and identify the impossible date. The recording continued through the moment we stepped into the records office. Luke's voice returned, stripped of his client meeting tone. Dad taking the Mercedes was the point. Paige copied his signature onto the vehicle ownership release. I used it for the $94,000 title loan, and the stolen car report makes him look like the thief before he can prove it was company property. Emma's fingers tightened around the edge of her chair, even though she had heard that part once before. The lender fraud officer stopped writing. Luke stared at the recorder as if the machine had betrayed him. Then came Paige's lower answer, clear on the preserved original. I prepared the release, copied Daniel's signature, and filed the stolen car report from Luke's account. I knew the Mercedes belonged to the shop. The report had to be in the system before the lender called, or nobody would believe Daniel stole it. Emma closed her eyes. The detective looked from the police report in his hand to Paige. On the recording, Luke answered, "Then delete the draft after the loan funds." I stopped playback. For several seconds, the room held nothing but the hum of the service bays beyond the wall. Paige spoke first. "Luke told me the car was supposed to be his." The lender fraud officer touched the signed application. "On the preserved recording, you say you knew it belonged to the shop." I was scared. "Fear does not make Daniel's signature yours," Emma said. Luke turned toward me. "You pushed me into this. You spent my whole life promising the shop would be mine, then treated me like an employee." "You were an employee," I said. "You were also my son. One role paid you, the other did not transfer my name." His attorney placed a hand on his arm and told him to stop speaking. The lender fraud officer formally denied the $94,000 application, maintained the fraud hold, and accepted the recording and documents for referral to the institution's financial crimes unit. The detective accepted my signed complaint concerning the forged company release and false use of my identity. He also amended the stolen vehicle file to show that the registered company owner disputed Luke's report before it was completed. Those were official actions. They protected the car, the company credit, and the truth of what had been reported. They were not convictions. The detective asked Luke and Paige whether they wanted to provide statements. Both requested counsel. The attorney asked whether they were free to leave. The detective said, "Not at this point." After comparing the false report, loan application, title records, Daniel's denied signature, and preserved admissions, The detective placed Luke and Paige under arrest on probable cause related to forged vehicle documents, attempted title loan fraud, identity misuse, and a knowingly false police report. The detective explained the limit before taking them away. Arrest meant there was probable cause to continue the criminal process. It did not mean a jury had convicted them, and it did not let me choose their punishment. Luke's attorney asked that the brass tag not be treated as proof the car was a personal gift. The detective agreed. The tag was sentimental, not a title. It remained only because it had been attached to the company key at the time of the disputed possession. That small statement mattered to me. I did not want childhood turned into fraudulent evidence for either side. Luke had made the tag with love. What he did years later did not travel backward and make a 12-year-old boy dishonest. Emma began crying only after the elevator doors closed. I put a hand on her shoulder. But I did not tell her everything would be fine. Some truths protect a family by ending the version of it that could not continue. No employee watched from the parking lot. I had closed the service bay blinds before the meeting began. Their arrest was a consequence, not a show I wanted the shop to enjoy. As Luke passed the evidence table, he looked at the brass key tag. "You kept that all these years," he said. "I kept a lot of things longer than I understood them," I answered. The legal process moved more slowly after that. At the first court appearance, the prosecutor described the allegations and the defense lawyers challenged. The judge set release conditions and ordered the disputed company materials preserved. No testimony was taken about whether Luke had been a good son or whether I had been a difficult father. Those questions did not authenticate a signature. The title authority reviewed its own records separately. It compared the company registration, Luke's use agreement, the transfer request, and the fraud hold. Only after that review did it reject the ownership change. The clean title did not return because I demanded it. It returned because the submitted release could not survive the evidence attached to it. The lender removed the attempted lien from the company credit file. That prevented Luke's private loan request from following the shop into future borrowing. The decision protected employees who had never attended our Father's Day lunch and should never have paid for it. Within several weeks, prosecutors filed formal charges. Luke and Paige pleaded not guilty. No one was sentenced at the first hearing. The lender continued its review and confirmed that no loan funds had been released. The title authority rejected the transfer request and restored the clean company record after reviewing the genuine title and fraud documentation. The criminal court later issued an order barring Luke and Paige from using my identity, contacting the lender about the Mercedes, or entering Mercer Motor Restoration while the case proceeded. That order did not decide the final charges. It protected the people and property involved. I terminated Luke's employment through the same written process I would have used for any manager who submitted false company documents. His wages were paid through his final authorized day. His personal tools were inventoried and released through counsel. I did not keep them as punishment. The employees kept their jobs. Payroll cleared. Customers received a short notice saying Luke no longer represented the company. It did not call him a criminal. The court, not my letterhead, would decide that. Emma stayed as bookkeeper, but I changed her authority too. No family member would ever again control a vehicle title, sales deposit, or company master key alone. The fleet cabinet required 2 authorized signatures. An outside controller reviewed transfers. My own access became subject to the same rule. "You do not have to restrict yourself," Emma said when we signed the policy. "A boundary is more trustworthy when the person who wrote it also lives inside it," I told her. She was quiet for a moment. I almost believed him. "You believed your brother might be hurt," I said. "That is not the same as helping him lie. Do you think you will ever forgive him?" I looked through the office glass at the Mercedes, clean and silent beneath the shop lights. Forgiveness is not the decision in front of me yet. Truth is. The following Father's Day arrived before the criminal case was finished. Emma brought sandwiches to the shop. We ate at the scarred wooden table in the break room, the same table where Luke had done homework while I rebuilt carburetors after closing. There was an empty chair beside us. Neither of us moved it away. After lunch, the fleet controller opened the key cabinet so I could take the Mercedes to a customer event. The brass tag stamped Daddy had been returned from evidence that week. The letters still leaned downhill. I held it for a moment, remembering a 12-year-old boy striking each letter as if getting the word right could make fatherhood permanent. Then I removed the tag from the Mercedes key. I did not throw it away. I hung it on a small hook above my workbench beside Luke's first crooked metal washer tray. The Mercedes key went back into the numbered fleet cabinet where it belonged. Emma closed the door and turned the shared lock. The click was quiet. It was not the sound of losing a son. It was the sound of finally knowing that love and ownership had never been the same key.